You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's editor Giles Parkinson and leading energy analyst David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Evergen, providing cutting-edge energy management software for battery optimisation, virtual power plants and distributed energy resources. And Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Renew Economy and founder and editor of its EV-focused sister site, The Driven. And joining me, as usual, is ITK Principal David Leach. David, I trust you are well and very proud of your new EV, which has taken you to New England and back with very little in the way of charging problems.
Well, Giles, that's the Xpeng G6, and it's not mine; it's my wife's.
What were you doing driving it then?
Well, because frankly, it's got a bigger battery than my very early Hyundai Ioniq, and if you want to do 400 kilometres, like from Tamworth to Sydney, you know, between 8 p.m. and midnight without stopping, then that's the way to go. And along the way, we ran into a beautiful charging station at Tamworth with one of the new, I think, is it Kemerton chargers? So much advanced over the old tritium ones, or so it seems to me, and very well located. And generally, I think the state of charging's picking up, but we're not really here to talk about that today, are we? We've got this great guest today who is full of insights.
Yes, Paul Simshauser is the CEO of Powerlink, which is the main transmission company in Queensland. We got to talk to Paul earlier today. Paul recently announced his resignation after 5 years in the post. And the chat came, well, timely in a way, a day ahead of the Queensland LNP government announcing its energy plan, which we won't get in time for this week's episode, and we'll have a good think about it next week. But Paul is one of the bigger thinkers in the energy transition, being an academic, a professor, I think, as well, at Griffith University, and the author of many a paper. And as you point out in the conversation, he's worked in generation companies and now transmission. So let's have a listen to what Paul had to say. Paul Simshauser, welcome back to the Energy Insiders podcast.
Thanks, Giles and David. Good to see you both.
You appeared a couple of years ago, actually, but I think I was away that day or went to bed too early or something like that, but I missed out on the conversation. But you've announced just a short time ago that after 5 years that you're leaving Powerlink, 5 years as CEO. What could possibly motivate you to leave right now, just when it looks like it's getting really interesting?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and it's the question I get asked the most, I suppose. With I think with network utilities, they do move in very distinct 5-year cycles. And I can almost work out why my predecessor left when she did, just about to move into the next 5-year regulatory reset. And I remember sort of thinking at the time when I started here, aim to do 5 to 7 years. And I've realised actually you're better to do 5 or 10, nothing in between. So
what's so scary about a second five-year reset?
I reckon I'm running out of party tricks, Giles. And I think the other thing is too, I'd had a good run, probably done all the things that I, had on my sort of checklist of things to do while here at Powerlink. So, and there's a lot of good stuff to do all around the industry. So I'll go and decompress a little bit in academia for a bit, write a few more papers. I've got a few in mind that I want to dive into, and then go back, jump back on the tools somewhere.
The sort of rumor is that you've got generation in the blood.
It is where I come from, right? So I'd probably more likely to go back to generation than another network, I think. Although I've got to tell you guys, the one part of the industry that has evaded me so far is distribution networks, and I think they're going to be really interesting over the next 5 to 10 years as well. So
yep. So I didn't mean to jump in this early, but here I am. I just want to start with a kind of offbeat thing because and that's community engagement. You're one of the few organisations that, that is to say, Powerlink is one of the few organisations that's been doing community engagement surveys for years. And therefore, I think you probably have the pulse on them in a formal as well as informal sense. What's the mood like in Queensland at the moment, and where do you expect it to go as a kind of trend?
Look, I think when I reflect back on the surveys we've done over the years, there's a couple of things that are always pop out as articles of faith for us. I think the first is that any communities that we're in need to believe there's good distributional fairness about the way we, as an industry, approach a community. That there are really good sort of governance processes and pressure release valves and mechanisms that people can tap on if they feel things aren't going wrong. And then there's there's almost an equity element to it. But the order at which and the prominence of those variables in communities can reverse in order depending on their experience. So, for example, here in Queensland, if you go around to the Western Downs, that is a very sophisticated community. They've been dealing with, they had the huge wave of coal seam gas. Going through that, they knew what they wanted from an industry when it turns up, and they're extremely active in, accelerating things or trying to move our industry in as quickly as we can with tight guardrails. So they very supportive of wind and solar and battery projects, provided everyone stays within the guardrails, and they set those pretty clearly for everybody. That they're the gold standard, I think, in the state of Queensland. Move into in another area where maybe they haven't had any development for some time. The order of those priorities does seem to change a bit on what's most important to them. In terms of the general mood and how it's altered over time, we did notice a bit of a drop in our last survey in terms of community attitudes towards towards our beloved industry. It wasn't they weren't large sort of drops, but it was down a bit on prior survey results, and that probably reflects that there's a lot of noise. We've got some pretty interesting characters in Queensland, as you know, and they're they do a pretty good job on the airwaves, whether that's the social medias or the conventional media. So there's a lot of traffic up here in Queensland that we have to navigate.
You've got a lot of interesting characters on the media, but you also got some interesting characters in the new government now. When you started 5 years ago, Queensland was a long, long way behind the rest of Australia in terms of its sort of transition. I mean, it's still and it still remains the state most heavily dependent on coal-fired generation. A lot has happened since then, and there seems to be a lot up in the air still because we're actually recording this a day before the Queensland government announces its new energy roadmap, and I guess we can probably try and guess what might be in it. But just sort of tell me a little about what, from your point of view, has happened over those 5 years in terms of the acceleration in the transition, the state of that transition, and kind of what's at risk now.
Look, I think with when I think back to where we started back in the and for my part that was mid 2020, there hadn't been much occur in the renewable space, as you will both well remember oh so well. And then over a period of time, we went from sort of, I guess, a languishing part of the market to, sort of a roaring machine. And I think the thing that made a big difference to investor sentiment was a belief in the playbook that was presented to them with clear markers that sort of guided investment. You remember that there were renewable energy targets set. And they were set in legislation. I never felt that they were anywhere near as important as actually setting clear marker dates for coal-fired plant closures. To me, that was the thing that, it sort of created the space for people to go and do what they needed to do. That certainty that they got from those coal closures meant you had an enormous amount of renewable investment commitments. There's well over $20 billion worth of renewable projects, and 9,500 megawatts in total. It was. I don't mean to sound like it was sort of like a madhouse, because it wasn't. There was a lot of order behind what each of those investors pursued. And I guess when what I think has sort of transpired over the most recent few years, I don't think sort of tuning or detuning targets is necessarily going to make a big difference per se, because there was no sort of, while the targets were there, it wasn't like there were financial bonuses or penalties for hitting them. It was just what the market was doing because
But Paul, even those coal closures are really just announcements. It's like they're not necessarily what's actually going to happen. People just say that just to cover themselves. And everything we've talked about so far, moving from the Darling Downs, brings us up to Gladstone. And once every 6 months, some organisation releases a report about Gladstone, and then every now and then something happens. You guys have been working very hard on the transmission side of things up there to allow for the Gladstone Power Station closure. But in fact, I don't believe that's still finally signed off on. And if we look at where Gladstone Power Station, which is not owned by the Queensland government, but is subsidised by it, effectively via CS Energy, if we look at where it's used, its probably principal use is going to the Boyne Island aluminium smelter. And there's still a lot of details around the firming for that haven't been sorted out. I guess my question to you generally, not necessarily as a Powerlink person, but as the person that knows Queensland extremely well, are you happy with the way things are going to go around Gladstone?
So first of all, let me start with the transmission and then hoover back out to the broader market. Does that make sense? So I think from a transmission perspective, we've been planning on this for years, and the thinking behind it was, David, and we didn't feel there was a lot of rocket science to it. We just knew the plant had been commissioned in 1976. Back in 2021, as we sat there and looked at the year 2035, we thought, boy, that's going to be a pretty old plant by that stage. Do we really think it will get there? Probably not. We were aware of certain dates that made logical exit points before then, and March 2029 was a key date that we were aware of. So all of our planning then turned back in 2021 to how do we make sure that if there is and largely informed by the speed at which Hazelwood went. Back in 2017, I've sort of I watched that from Queensland, but I watched the impact of it, and I'd been curious about how, what sort of exposures we would have all the way back in 2017. In those days, I was in the Director General's role up here in the Department of Energy. So my sort of thinking around Gladstone had been floating that far back. Arrived at Powerlink, and actually a lot of good work had already been done. All we started to do was firm up. So what we needed to do was make sure there was a really good reinforcement of transmission capacity between the two substations are referred to as Calval and Calliope River. It's code for Callide Power Station and Gladstone Power Station. That's basically the corridor. So if we could reinforce that line, that would ensure that the Gladstone area network would be robust in and of itself. Then there's that issue of system strength. In and around the Queensland grid, at any one point in time, you sort of need about 6 spinning machines in central Queensland, 4 in the south and 2 in the north. And if we lose 6 units in central Queensland through a closure, you sort of need by definition, you're going to need a couple of new spinning machines that are providing protection grade fault current. And at this point in time, the thing that we are most confident with to provide that is a combination of either synchronous condensers or indeed gas turbines with a clutch. We're pretty comfortable with those, and we can sort of top up the upper parts of system strength with forming
with the batteries to top up. And I guess implicit in that is there seems to be might be putting words in your mouth, a switch, not de-emphasising batteries, not de-emphasising even coal in Queensland, but emphasising gas as the new sort of firming sort of thing.
Yeah, I think we have formed a view that some time ago that gas turbine capacity will be pretty important. We don't actually see much of a change in the volume of gas used, but we did see sort of the potential for the intensity of gas being used to alter a bit. So the implication there being some GTs as a last line of defence would be pretty helpful. So if I think again through just on the transmission side, we know what we need to do with the first stage of transmission, and probably 2 synchronous condensers, and we're confident that we can get those into the market. All of those developments, the transmission buying capacity, the synchronous condensers, we're confident we can get those into the market, in the right time. From a generation perspective, as you'd be aware, there's still some reasonably big projects under construction up here right now, and they are capable of providing a fair whack of the energy that that Gladstone currently produces. Bearing in mind, Gladstone, it only operates at 45% capacity factor. Its output's about 6,500 gigawatt hours a year. So a couple of wind farms would knock that off. And curiously, there's a couple that I think have got a very good chance of reaching financial close and starting to ramp up as Gladstone's ramping down. And there's this extraordinary.
One of those, obviously, Bungapan, and this is my last question before I hand back to Giles again. Sorry, I've been thinking about this hard. Have you got any other ones that you think might get the go-ahead that you, yeah? And that's only part of the question. The other part of the question that I thought maybe you could shed some light on for some of our listeners who don't really appreciate it is that there is a large wind farm in Queensland, the McIntyre wind farm, but it's really acting like it's a very small wind farm after it's been commissioning for a whole year. My understanding is that that's partly around the New South Wales-Queensland transmission links, but I don't really understand the issue properly, and I wondered if you could shed any light on that and maybe the way forward so that wind farm can do what it was supposed to do.
Yes. So first of all, on the are there other projects beyond Bungapan? Yes, there are. There are a couple roughly in the same neighbourhood that have I think have got very good prospects of reaching financial close over the course of the next 12 months. And when it's an extraordinary thing that one of our planners brought down and showed me recently. If you take the average daily production of Gladstone Power Station and compare it to the average daily production of the couple of wind farms that are in reasonably close proximity, the shape of the output is eerily similar. Honestly, it looks the correlation looks like it's sort of 0.8, 0.85. It's sort of, and it's about 75% of the energy the annual energy that Gladstone produces, just on a P50 wind farm basis. So when you look at that, think, we can do this, right? This will be okay. I don't think we need to be panicking around. And of course, you guys both be aware there's an enormous number of batteries that have reached financial close and are under construction here in Queensland. And I can tell you there's the pipeline up here is sort of mind-blowingly large. We've obviously got a lot of solar, so we've got a lot of people wanting to put that solar to good use. So do I think that do I worry about sort of the Gladstone closure? No, I think there'll be enough coming through the pipe. What will become a lot more pressing for us, though, is the next closure will become a lot more serious. That's where we'll need to be thinking. There'll be a lot more thoughtful. Just turning back to your other question, David, on the McIntyre wind farm. I must confess, I am going to have to take that on notice. I haven't had an update on it for a little while, so I'll have to pull out the old Grey Nicholas bat and block, unfortunately. I'll try and come back to you with something by an email after post fact, because I'm curious myself now.
Paul, just while we're talking about sort of system strength and you're talking about synchronous condensers and possibly gas-fired power stations, with clutches, etc., there's been a big push by some of the battery developers saying that, yes, we can actually provide all of those, the fault current levels and things like that. I mean, I can see that the transmission companies, not just Powerlink, but the others are sort of saying, well, we don't have enough evidence yet that is the case. What's your kind of observation on this?
What we've sort of decided to do, Giles, is as we've sort of got this mantra of serving Queenslanders and trying to be a benevolent planner, and under the conditions we're in, we believe we're going to need 9 synchronous condensers over a handful of years. We've decided we're going to order 2, maybe 4 at a stretch. We want to try and give the market as much time as possible to come in and actually provide these services in other ways when we get the confidence to adopt them. Now, there is obviously that thorny issue of lead order times, and we're obviously going to have to keep a very close eye on what happens to the order book at the moment. But at this stage, we feel like we need to do 2 and maybe another 2, but we want to try and give the market every opportunity to. You'd be aware that we've actually had good success with a gas turbine up here in Queensland, putting a clutch in rather than putting a syncon in. We think we probably did that for half the price.
It's interesting.
It's a much better outcome for consumers. So if we can get a few more of those, we'd be absolutely up for it.
And just two more questions from me before I hand back to David. One, just you mentioned wind farms, you mentioned solar and batteries. What we've seen in the new tender results from the capacity investment scheme is a lot of solar battery hybrids. And Rio has already contracted 2 of those, Guthrie's Gap and I think Smoky Creek. I always get those ones mixed up to help power those smelters. They seem to be the go-to technology at the moment. I mean, it might not be the case in a year's time. Maybe wind will find a way to bring its costs down, but seems to be a pretty interesting development and not something that people expect. I mean, there isn't actually a single solar battery hybrid on Australia's grid, but we've got about 20 of them under construction and contracted.
Yeah, I mean, I did a piece of work recently with, when I say I did a piece of work, gee, I'm really sort of overstating my involvement here. I had the team from Oricon do a whole bunch of work for me. So Paul Gleason and his team from Oricon, we gave them a pretty simple task, and they go away and get the, I mean, they do an enormous amount of due diligence for projects. I think in their broader book, they might have done 60,000 megawatts of projects, between Australia and New Zealand. We just asked them, could you anonymize or collate all your data from all of those projects over the last 5 or 7 years, every year, so that we can track roughly what the costs of these technologies are doing, wind, solar, batteries, and can you help us understand which parts are moving and where the opportunities are going forward? And it was an extraordinary set of insights we got from it. And we just asked, can we have the median for each of those 4 technologies? And as you would all, as everyone I think on your podcast will know, batteries have come plunging down in cost. It's been an extraordinary sort of reduction over the last handful of years. Solar's tracked really well in spite of, sharply rising interest rates, high inflation rates, civil construction costs rising, and so on. But they seem to have almost tracked sideways across the last 5 to 7 years. Wind sort of fell, hit a nadir of the cost in 2019, and then we all know, it's really jumped up. In fact, it's virtually doubled in nominal dollars over that period. And what sat behind that was inflation. So if we just say, let's just say they went from roughly 50 to 100. Inflation alone, just consumer price inflation here in Australia, it's actually about $15 worth. I think that the rising interest rates on the bigger capital cost added another $15 a megawatt hour. So there's 30 out of the 50 you're looking for. The supply and install of the turbines, was another 10. I wish I could tell you the transmission was nothing, but actually it was.
About to get to that.
Yeah, it was. Look, the transmission connection cost was $4 a megawatt hour. Now, and that doesn't sound like much, but it's $4 above the rate of inflation on the base of whatever we were charging to begin with. So that meant it probably went from $5 to $10 as a connection charge or something like that. So it was a bad result, and then the balance of plant accounted for the rest. So it's a tough story for wind, and so I can see why at the moment, if you're an investor looking at our market, and we as I'm sure you would have seen, the team from Rystad do really nice work comparing the world's roughly 45 largest power markets. We have the best intraday spreads in the world for storage applications. So Australia's just a great place to do solar, as you know, and it's a terrific place to do storage. So it does make there's a bit of fun.
I'm not sure it's a great place to do solar by itself. I looked in the last 30 days, the spot price for solar was about $2. You wouldn't want to have too many months of that.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I should caveat, yes, Australia's not a great place to do solar on its own right now. But I mean, we as a technology cost, it's actually been pretty good because the technology cost has been dropping while other headwinds have been feeding into those. And then if you look at it on a $1 per megawatt hour basis, looks pretty good. You just need to move it as I and sort of a customer saying through space and time, you'll do well, David.
And just on power, on transmission costs, I mean, AEMA, we've seen the increase in costs and civil construction costs. I mean, obviously they're affected by that over the last year or two, and AEMA admitting that having to sort of rethink its longer term transmission plans because of that. I mean, it's going to go ahead with the stuff that's already outlined in the ISP. What's your observation on that? Can you tell us why that's happened? And what's the alternative? Is there any alternative? I mean, I hear people talk about virtual transmission. I mean, you mentioned at the start of the interview about distribution networks, the potential there. Is there alternatives to new transmission lines? What can be done?
So yeah, let me unpack those. So first of all, on the cost of transmission, I know when we were doing our power system planning back in the start of 2022, we could visibly see costs from pick a date, 2017 through to 2021, everything pretty stable. Lead order times are stable. We felt we could probably do 500 kV networks for $3.5–4 million a kilometre, plus a contingency. We don't think you'd get much change out of 10 million a kilometre now for 500 kV network. So it's really jumped a lot. And
that's single circuit or double circuit?
Double circuit, yeah. And
I reckon 14 is the number you really want, but go on.
But let's say no change out of 10, and it might be worse, David, depending on the distances. And I think and of course what happened was a combination of things. The Russia-Ukraine war had a very dislocating impact on energy flows around the world. And of course, Europe couldn't take that. They needed to go and press a big hard button and invest quickly and start trying to bulk up on renewables. The Inflation Reduction Act followed, and all of a sudden we found our supply lines, sort of being overwhelmed with orders. And even with the current environment in the United States, I'm aware of offshore wind projects in the northeast of that country, having swords put through it. It's just been replaced by other orders, data centers, gas turbines, big transmission corridors, and so on. So there hasn't been much of a let up on the transmission cost side of things that we can see. So then, what's the alternative? So when we sat back and looked at our network and what we could do, we did believe that we could actually keep hitting the sorts of the sorts of numbers, the aspirations of the industry, and the journey, I guess you'd say, to 2050 by being shoot with a rifle rather than a bullet. So we'd be doing smaller, shorter, renewable energy zones, or they'll get and the idea there was we'd trade off between probably better quality wind and solar resources to maybe they'll be a little bit lesser. The big difference was you had to be accurate. So when you've got a 500 kV superhighway running up and down the coastline, you can build anything anywhere and you'll be fine. When you sort of start relying more heavily on a 275 kV network, your generation siting becomes a lot more important. Where you put it, closer to loads and so on, does become important. There are also opportunities, I think, with things like dynamic line rating. So we have just been piloting with that. We teamed up with the Bureau of Meteorology a couple of years ago. We found some line-mounted weather stations, and we're popping them on our lines where there are thermal limits. And and one of the trials we've got at the moment, 40% more output out of an existing transmission line, and about $1 million of capital to get the equipment and change a bit of control system.
And why is that? Is that because they weren't as hot as you thought they were going to be?
It's because when it's windy, it's colder. Is the shortest answer.
Yeah, that is the shortest answer, Dave. It's a good way of saying it. Our wind, when it's really running, if you think about our thermal ratings for transmission lines, we used to have to worry about 12:30, middle of the day, huge air conditioning loads and so on. These days, 12:30 is still pretty busy, but a lot of that power is now being produced behind the meter. So really, when our lines are running the hardest is later in the evening, and of course it's much cooler, and the wind's blowing and having a cooling effect on the ratings of those lines. And then, of course, Giles, you pointed to the other just a great opportunity for us is to max out in distribution land. We know our distribution networks have got sort of latent capacity as well. There's obviously ongoing capacity of rooftop and behind the meter applications from consumers and industrials and commercials, but there are I'm aware of really good projects that my colleagues, certainly down in New South Wales, I'm aware of a couple of great projects that Ausgrid and Essential at least have got. And I'm sure each of the DNSPs have got a few party tricks up their sleeve.
So, Paul, I wanted to ask, the broader newspapers at the moment are full of old industries and the support that they're getting. One of which I guess is out at Mount Isa, is the one that's most in the news at the moment. And lo and behold, we've got copper string. I don't know, is that the string that holds Mount Isa together? But I mean, as a project, if Mount Isa's going away, what's the point of copper string? Can I ask more broadly?
Yeah, look, with it's really hard for me to comment on the Mount Isa economy, just because, to be perfectly honest, I'm just not an expert in it. There's obviously a lot of critical minerals out in that part of the
Neither's anyone else, Paul, but there's still plenty of comments getting made. In fact, the less you know about something, the more you are inclined to have an opinion. That's the general standard view.
So I'm probably not the greatest person in the know to talk about that, David. But they're obviously on the along that corridor. What I can tell you is there's a lot of renewable energy capacity all the way out to Mount Isa, I should add too. I mean, I'm aware of there's an ag firm out there with enormous cattle, an enormous cattle and presumably sheep station, which has some blistering wind speeds, and it's not far away from the alignment of that particular transmission line. So, and it's not Hughenden too, David. It's actually much further west. So there's lots and lots of renewables along that corridor.
And as there are in the Northern Territory and Western Australia, but no one's suggesting using that to put load into Brisbane. We see it's just a question of what the best way to do things is. So I won't ask any more about copper string, but I suppose once it's built, it will be great for renewable energy. But Barumba, I guess, is another comment. I'm not even quite aware of what the status of that is at the moment. Are you still building transmission to connect to Barumba?
So there's about 3 pumped hydro projects at least up here at Queensland that are all in various stages of development. So Barumba, the Queensland Hydro project, that's actually sort of gone into QIC, so they're working through a process with it. We've done a certain amount of I guess early planning works, but we're certainly we're not at a point where we're sort of placing orders or anything like that. As is customary for us, we're largely beholden to the investors themselves telling us when they want us to get cracking. The other 3 projects, the other 3 pumped hydros, they're all feverishly working away. There's I'm aware there are a couple of them. We're having to do a few studies for them, just test line ratings and sort of capacities and so on. So they're all working away feverishly.
And so, if you were sitting once again in the Director General's office and in charge of or looking at energy policy going forward, you mentioned earlier that the closure of Gladstone has long been anticipated and well planned for, but it's a bit confusing around, say, the Callide power stations. Would you be starting to build new stuff now? And I'm using the word stuff, but I really mean wind and solar for the energy firmed up somehow or other for the replacement of those stations, since really they are amongst the older group in Queensland.
Look, I think ultimately those power stations, the granddad's axe analogy eventually runs out. We all know that in our industry, and if you think about our power stations, they had design lives of 30 years. That was their engineering design life. Then when you were doing sitting inside an investment house or a investment bank or a advisory firm, pulling together the details for a merger and acquisition, you probably put useful life 50 year with a little acronym underneath saying IBG, YGB, I'll be gone, you'll be gone.
The little analyst would then probably draw attention to that footnote and say that, in my opinion, they won't go that long. But go on.
Yep, and here we are. We are now up. We're not gone at all. We're here. We're here right here and now. So, if you look at what's happened with our coal-fired fleet on the east coast of Australia, there's been about 10 or 11 coal-fired generators that have closed over the last decade and a half, and their average age at closure was 44 years. There was a couple that made it out to about 50, 51, but when you take them as a weighted average of their megawatts, so 6,000 megawatts of kit gone, 44 years was the average closure age. If you take our existing fleet, it's 38 years. So the weighted average of our existing fleet's 38 years. So now look, it's also fair to say that some of these machines were probably slightly better built than the ones that have since gone, but nonetheless, it's do I think we ought to be getting on with the job? Yes, I do, because there will be limits to there'll be mechanical engineering limits to what you can do with these plants. We know there's going to be market limits. I mean, one of the big risks to all of these, if I can just refer to it as inflexible generators, is if we don't sort of work out how to move them around adequately, we are going to find ourselves for weeks at a time in the middle of the day where there is literally nowhere for the power to go. If we and it's a transitional issue for us, but it isn't.
And Paul, I would also put to you that the coal generators already don't make much money in the middle of the day in the spot market, and that they've survived because gas has been setting the price in the evening peak, and there probably hasn't been enough wind in the overnight market. And so you get your revenue in that evening and morning peak and a little bit in the overnight market. And I want to put it to you that all these batteries coming in, no one's going to build, 20 gigawatts of batteries and never run them. And that's going to make it hard to earn a return in the evening peak. I want to suggest that to you. What do you think?
Look, I think for any of the marginal thermal plants, life's going to get more difficult. No question, David. And I think if you go back and look at the story of Northern Power Station, it's probably the most interesting. I remember sort of putting a chart in one of my academic papers, and I just plotted from I think it might have been from 2009 through to 2016, its monthly energy output in megawatt hours. Just a very simple line graph, and you could see what happened to it, David. It was just, its outage rates were no doubt rising a bit because it was having to work a lot harder. It was getting older, but it also the residual load that it was serving was getting more awkward, and eventually you could just sort of almost see it. It got to a point where I thought, this is too hard, and it closed. It got too hard for the owners, and it closed. So I think that will eventually happen to each of our coal plants. I guess the issue is whether it's sort of mechanical or whether it's financial or a combination of both that eventually makes it hard for them. And of course we're not really ready on the East Coast for them to pull out of the market yet. That's the reality. Our supply side's not robust enough yet, but we've got to get our supply side to the gym pretty quickly, get working pretty hard on all the flexible firming pieces of kit we need so that we can manage those exits gracefully rather than awkwardly.
Yes, and I think in Queensland, I rarely criticise Queensland for the way it does things. I've always said it's a better place to do business in many ways than in, say, Victoria. But I do think the rate of wind turbine deliveries in Queensland with the police escorts and all that, like one turbine a week, we're not going to be ready anytime soon. But I'll just leave that out there as a passing comment. And I did want to ask your opinion. I don't know if you have one, but it's all what you've worked at AGL and had a good look at the national market as opposed to just the Queensland market. And it's always seemed to me that there's a great role for more transmission between New South Wales and Queensland, because Queensland wind is very diversified compared to the wind in the other states. And even with the falling cost in batteries, it seems to me that both states and everyone could benefit from more Queensland wind, and that wind being able to get out of the state, and equally New South Wales wind being able to get in more easily. Do you have any thoughts about that?
The last time we looked at a bigger New South Wales Queensland interconnector, in the near term, we couldn't quite see the value in it. Over the longer term, I think, David, you're right. Diversity will always be of great value. But I think until both supply sides in both markets get a little bit more developed, it was hard. We felt it was hard to make a robust case for it. Of course, the ISP, in 2024 had it, earmarked as a or had a marker on it. I think what we had sort of formed the view of was that, look, maybe that might have been true with previous transmission costs. We were probably swimming in some numbers that were starting to get us very nervous, and felt that the better view was to try and work out how to max out a bit more locally first before we start going across broader distances. And that, to be honest, David, that was true within our own state. We had big plans to do a very big 500 kV backbone from Townsville all the way down to southeast Queensland, and we can't make that case stack up anymore. I think if you look dispassionately at Queensland, we will be in the business of unwinding transmission developments and trying to get things done a lot more locally, a lot more accurate. You've got to be more accurate. That's the quid pro quo, but trying to get the power as close to the loads as is humanly possible.
And Paul, just I'd like to touch on just something we mentioned before. You're talking about Gladstone, or you're talking about the targets, and we've seen that the current Queensland government's going to rip up its targets apparently, and you say that shouldn't really matter much. What we don't know yet is whether there will be timing on coal closures, and I know David sort of attempted to answer that question too, but you seem to think it was important because it does actually set some sort of parameters for the people who might invest in wind and solar and other technologies.
Yeah, look, I think if I think back to over time, what gave project proponents confidence to go forward in the presence of a lot of it. I mean, as you guys know, the power generation investment game, it's a tough business. Whether you're doing a battery, a battery and solar, or a wind, I mean, trying to hold these projects together at any over any period of time is exceedingly difficult. And then, of course, we torture them with our system strength studies. So you've got to try and hold a project together for weeks and weeks and months on end. I mean, we really do make it hard on people. I mean, the flip side is when you get through all of that, you're usually able to get to construction quickly. I can tell you, I looked recently at the latest transmission connection queues in Great Britain and the United States, and they vary between 4 and 6 years as an average, and the data was somewhere between 12 months and 12 years, depending on the site. It was sort of breathtaking, really, and we're blessed in that regard. There's a little bit of work up front, but once you're through those processes, it's sort of okay. But yeah, I mean, they're tough projects at the best of time. So anything you can provide the industry on the grounds of certainty will obviously help. And I think credible closure dates is useful. I do think, though, we need to be very careful about sort of closure dates that we know are going to need to get extended, because then they become, what one of my colleagues once said, a quasi closure commitment. And I think that's worse than no commitment at all in some respects.
It's a free option. It's a free option on the guy. He can close if he wants to, and he'll probably get paid not to close. So we've already seen, or potentially paid. We've seen a few examples of that.
And I think that the other thing too is that that I'm ever sort of conscious of. We want to make sure with our coal fleet, the reality is we need them at the moment. There's some we can sort of see moving out of the market sooner than later. Others we know it'll be a while before we're capable of digesting or moving the supply side adequately. And amongst all of this, we've got to make sure that we keep power prices in a bound that's politically tractable. That's the thing.
But Paul, what's abundantly clear is that you can't close any coal stations until you build new supply. And that says basically that we will have a shortage of supply relative to demand. You can't increase demand until we've got new supply. So the only recipe is really to build new, in my opinion, you tell me I'm wrong, I'm a humble keyboard warrior, is to build new supply. And that's also the only way to get prices down, because it's by increasing supply relative to demand that makes price go down. Or have I read the textbooks wrong?
No, you're spot on, David. And if you've got those So go stand back again from where we started in 2020 in Queensland to where we are right now with 9,500 megawatts of stuff coming into the market. It's a combination of all of those things as well. All of those pieces are important. Each piece of the puzzle is important. And I think one of the things that we probably didn't anticipate over if I go back a couple of years, what did we underestimate? One would have been so rising costs of equipment prices. I don't think any of us saw that. Secondly, I think none of us really anticipated the complexity of our communities and how that might start to alter the timing at which we can do things. And I think thirdly, the thing that I hear the most is environmental approvals. That they are becoming trickier. They're taking a little bit longer. They're a lot more delicate. They're necessary. I mean, these are all parts of our industry that we just need to learn how to navigate a bit better. What it means is things probably aren't moving at the same pace that we were all moving at a few years ago. But don't forget, there's an army of us right across our sector that haven't given up. We're all running at 1,000 miles an hour trying to get the job done.
No, I think that's true. Well, there is an army of us. It's not the only army that's out there as far as community engagement, may I just say, and I won't say any more than that. But I don't know, Paul, we've probably come into the end of our time, and as Giles has something else that he wants to ask, but I'd just like to offer you the opportunity as someone who's been looking at the market for a heck of a long time from a lot of different viewpoints, as an academic, as an economist, as a CEO, if there's any final observations that you wanted to make.
Oh, David, we've probably traversed a lot of the territory in our conversation today. I guess probably the key thing is, and I mentioned this yesterday when I was with a group of people. We can't fall in love with our projects. We've got to fall in love with serving the consumers that we're there to look after. And sometimes that means doing bigger things and doing them faster, and sometimes it means stopping and trying to find a cheaper way or a more reliable way. And and we can never lose sight of that. Focus on the end game, and that's certainly been a big issue for us, and something we've had to really think through carefully. On the transmission side, don't fall in love with building big transmission towers. Fall in love with serving Queenslanders in our case.
And that just prompts me just one final question. I was busting to ask this, just about sort of consumer energy resources and rooftop solar and battery storage and things like that. I mean, how does that sort of change the game in Queensland and around Australia? Because it's a huge uptake. It's a sort of a refuge now for households, or they consider it to be one. Is this more than you had expected? How does it affect all those other decisions? Or is it just like an extra good thing that makes things easier? Or maybe it makes it harder?
Oh, look, I think I would actually say all of the above, Giles. I remember sitting down with my old minister, Mark Bailey, years and years ago, being asked about what the outlook for rooftop solar would be. And I said, look, I don't think we'll ever get more than 800,000 rooftops in Queensland ever done. We're up to 900,000, so there you go. But the more interesting thing was I was assuming 3 kilowatts, and of course the average size going on now is 12.4 kilowatts. Can you believe? That's a mini power station. So when I think back to when we first started looking at the potential of rooftop, I greatly underestimated just what an impact it could have. And I think it would be easy to underestimate, what an impact storage behind the meter will have as well. So it's just it's something we need to try and max out on, because it's a valuable resource to us. And anything we do there takes a little bit of pressure off the utility scale side.
And it just proves that a good forecaster forecasts very often.
I have had to forecast this a lot, David, because I tell you what, crikey, like most people, it's everyone just missed how the take up rates of rooftop solar and indeed just solar capacity worldwide has been breathtaking, hasn't it?
Paul, it's been fantastic to talk to you. I feel like we could talk for another half an hour or so about all the different things happening. Congratulations on your job. Thanks for coming and joining us, and look forward to hearing what you're up to next and your next academic paper. Have you got a subject yet?
Not yet, but I'm fine-tuning it.
Does that mean that you've written the thing yet and haven't worked out what it's about, or you have a...
A little bit of both. In fact, David, it's on that very issue you spoke about. How do you get that overlap between entry and exit? I've been thinking about that a lot. So I've got a potion. I just need to work out how to explain it.
Well, that's good. I look forward to it. I think Powerlink will miss you. It's been a good team up there. So thanks again for coming on Energy Insiders.
Absolute pleasure. Good to talk to you guys.
And that was Paul Simshauser from Powerlink. We'll be back in a moment.
Australia's largest clean energy event is back. Join us at All Energy Australia on October 29 and 30 at Melbourne's Convention and Exhibition Centre. With over 450 suppliers, 500 world-class speakers and 12 stages, you'll gain the insights, solutions and connections to power the nation's clean energy future. Best of all, it's completely free to attend. Register now at all-energy.com.au.
You're listening to the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles Parkinson and David Lynch. David, before we get on to the news of the week, which is mostly around snowy hydro and the capacity investment scheme and solar battery hybrids, what did you make of what Paul had to say?
I think I'm not sure what to make exactly of it. I think that the transition in Queensland is going to go ahead. I mean, the fundamental truth, when all said, I think Queensland's going to build a little more gas generation and try and keep the coal running longer and not go as fast as the previous government was on transitioning. But as we discussed, and this remains the ultimate fundamental truth, if you want to progress, if you want to grow demand, never mind just replacing coal. If you want to grow demand, you've got to build new supply. We're not going to build lots of new gas supply for energy. We're not going to build any more coal generators. We're not going to build any nuclear. We're not going to build any offshore wind in Victoria just now. So we're left with building our rooftop system out and the wind and the solar system out at utility level. That's what's going to happen. And that's what has to happen.
It is what has to happen. And look, and I think that Paul made his points very well about the options and the need and the capability of actually making that happen. And obviously there's some technology choices. I was really interested in what he was saying about system strength. They need, can't remember now, is it 9 syncons, but they're putting in an order for 2 to see how they go, because other technologies such as battery storage may fill the gap, or even gas generators with clutches. And there's other options too for transmission. And it was interesting to note that some of the grander plans that his company had been considering are now kind of on the back burner because of the increased costs. But David, that was a long conversation with Paul.
And also probably because they wouldn't be supported politically. But
there's that too. There's that too. Look, it was a great conversation with Paul. It went for a while, so we won't keep people too long. But I think there's a few things worth talking about. Capacity investment scheme, 6.5 gigawatts of wind and solar. What's interesting is the amount that came with battery storage as a part of hybrid projects. Almost all of them solar battery hybrids. That seems to be the new go-to technology now. The costs are competitive with wind. They seem to be easier to build. A bucket load of battery storage has been, awarded contracts in the last couple of.
If I looked across all 3 of the CIS tenders, and remembering that very little of what actually won a CIS contract has got to FID yet, but what we see across the entire NEM of the 3 tenders is 6.5 gigawatts of wind, 6.5 gigawatts of solar, nearly 9 gigawatts of battery megawatts, and an incredible 31 gigawatt hours just about of storage. But of course, there's a heck of a lot of battery stuff at least, and some solar and some wind under construction outside of the CIS. It is certainly putting the apple cart on its head in terms of how much storage is going to be around. We're not yet seeing really the impact of that. But the batteries won't take that long to build, I don't believe. Even AEMO can't stuff up the connection process on that too much. That's been unfair. AEMO is doing a great job. So we're going to see all these batteries in operation, within, I don't know, a while.
Yeah, and look, we might even see some wind farms come to financial close by the end of the year. I mean, we've just talked about the Palmer Wind project from Tilt Renewables that AGL has signed a contract for. Our Energy has come out and said that Carmody's wind farm, Carmody's Hill Wind Farm in South Australia, is likely to reach financial close by the end of the year. BP Lightsource is keen on getting financial close of its winning project by the end of the year, or may go into early 2026.
There are a lot of wind projects around, and a couple in West Australia, the gossip has been. But you bring up this important point, which I alluded to in the podcast, that there are a lot of barriers to building wind, we know. And one of them is the requirement in Queensland about police escorts for all wind turbines. Ironically, the only wind turbine that's ever got stuck on a road has been in Queensland, police escort or no. But the long and the short of it is, never mind the actual cost, which is quite significant, but the fact is that because of the police capability, you can only deliver one turbine a week in Queensland. Imagine how long it's going to take to build 1,000 megawatts. It takes 3.5 years to deliver the turbines for just one project. Entirely unacceptable.
Entirely unacceptable. Well, that's news to me. I'm fascinated by that. I think we'll probably dig deeper into that. And I mean, I am kind of fascinated by the logistics of sort of transporting these.
I mean, that's nearly as slow as Snowy is. Snowy is nearly as slow as Snowy. I mean, sorry.
Nearly as slow as Snowy. Slow as Snowy. Look, what do you make of Snow? I mean, look, Snowy Hydro. I mean, seriously, a big reset. The price has already come out from the ridiculous $2 billion. Let's say the starting price is really $5 billion. Well, they sort of thought about it a bit more deeply. That's more than doubled to $12 billion now. Now they're talking about another price blowout, which is going to take them 9 months just to estimate. So I don't know how they think they can actually complete the whole project in 3 years and deliver that if it takes 9 months to count the cost blowout. David, is this still a good idea, or should we just pack up and go home?
It's the usual thing. Once you get halfway across the stream, you just got to keep going. It's true it'll cost billions more dollars to complete, but there's no realistic policy proposition for it to be abandoned. It was probably a silly project with the benefit of hindsight, but we're going to end up with it, and no doubt it will find a use. Like all of these things, no matter how much the capital cost is, what really counts once it's built is the variable cost. That's what will end up driving the spot electricity price, and it will have a role to play.
I still can't decide whether it's going to be more useful for Snowy Hydro's business model or for the grid in as a whole.
Well, I don't agree with these days, and I never agreed with including all the transmission costs. There's a particular bit of the transmission cost that runs from Snowy to the rest of the rest of HumeLink that is part of the project cost. But in my vision of the world, the majority of HumeLink, Energy Connect and VNI West, Western Renewables Link, that's all required for all the renewables that are coming on to the system.
It might be time to wrap up. I think we've covered the CIS, we've covered Snowy Hydro. There has to be a lesson learned. Sorry.
Sorry, Giles. I just did want to mention one other thing. I think there is a lot of discussion at the moment about the best way to have policy support for a bunch of stuff. And we are getting a very strong situation, and I'll just leave this out there for all of our listeners to think about, that Tim Ayres likes old-style manufacturing unit businesses that have got lots of union members or people that vote for him. But he doesn't seem to like data centres very much. So if you exist, even if you're loss-making and don't really have a great long-term future, then you'll probably get a support package. But if you're a data centre, you're going to get built. Now, I'm not saying that Tim Ayres is wrong about that. What I am saying is, why should Tim Ayres be choosing which businesses get support and which ones don't? What does he know that all the smart people out there don't know? That's my question.
And just point out that Tim Ayres is the senator who is now Minister for Industry and the former head of the AMWU. I'm reading here.
Minister for Handouts, Giles.
Minister for Handouts. Well, I'm just going to leave that there, David.
Sorry, did we get off the topic of energy? But I mean, it's important because smelters and the like are big energy consumers. Tomago is right in frame on that. But equally, data centers are where a lot of the energy growth is forecast to come from around the world, a lot of the growth in consumption. Of course, we can't supply any growth in consumption because we haven't built enough new supply just yet. So the first job, whatever we're going to do, is to build some new supply. That's all we really have to think about.
Yes, and I do wonder just how much of Mount Isa's problems, the smelter there, is the choice made by Glencore more than a decade ago to go with gas to repower Mount Isa when the option was to go with renewables. And they're paying the price of that. I don't know whether that's the sort of the killing point for their economics, but running a city and running a smelter on gas-fired generation in a remote grid can't be cheap. Thank you very much for Paul Simshauser from Powerlink for joining us on this episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, Evergen and Pylon. Thanks to all the people listening out there. Thanks to all the people giving us lovely feedback. Thanks to you, David, and we'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week. Bye for now.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Evergen, the market-leading renewable energy software business that optimises residential and commercial solar and battery systems. Evergen enables large numbers of systems to operate as a single fleet, so network operators can use them as a virtual power plant, generating significant value for consumers, network operators, and the energy system as a whole. Evergen software is powering the energy system of the future. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.